situation too. You are sinful as well. And what he's going to do is he's going to take the next 49 verses to really try to break through that wall. Because religious insiders, church folk, can be pretty, we're good. All the people out there. So what Paul does is he starts by challenging trust structures. So the Jewish people had three main trust structures. One being circumcision, two being the law, and the third being covenant. That these were structures that they were leaning into for their salvation, for their faith. This is what gave them meaning and purpose. That's what God looked upon them, shined upon them in a favorable way. These were the trust structures, and Paul starts to pick them apart. Listen to this in Romans chapter 2, verse 17. Now you, if you call yourself a Jew, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know his will and approve of what is superior because you are instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those who are in the dark, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. So what Paul's saying, if this is you, if you're leaning on these trust structures for your salvation and your righteousness, I have something more to tell you, he's saying. And for us in these days, we have trust structures that we lean into for our own righteousness that we put on ourselves. Because maybe at some point you prayed a prayer or signed a card or walked forward or turned a light bulb or were baptized or were in a Bible study or taught a Bible study or whatever it may be. You may lean on these things for security and hope and righteousness. When the reality is those trust structures are not what brings about righteousness, what it brings about salvation. Rather, it is in Jesus. It is in trusting Jesus, him alone for our salvation, where we find faith. Paul continues in verse 21 of chapter 2. He says this. He says, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourselves? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. So what Paul's saying is, as an insider, those looking at you from the outside, because you say one thing and you do another, you're slandering the name of God. What Paul's saying is, it has to align. What you're teaching has to align with the way you're living. A word that so often gets used for hypocrite or for Christians is the word hypocrite, which the original Greek word means stage actor or pretender. And if you've been around or you've been a Christian for any time and you've talked to someone who's not a Christian or who's walking away from the church or deconstructing or whatever it may be, like the church is full of hypocrites. Now that doesn't mean that we are people who are sin-free by any means, but rather it's people who say you're one thing and act self-righteous, but really live out another way. Because if we are completely honest, let's just a real quick survey here. How many of you within the last week, month, year, 35 minutes have sinned in any particular way through word, action, thought, or attitude? I'm saying attitude again. That'll get us quicker than anything else, all right? Yeah, there you go. Yep. So we most of us here just confess that we have sinned, that we're not perfect. So we don't need to act like it. Because what Paul is saying, people who look in and look at Christians saying they're perfect while judging everyone else is blaspheming, slandering the name of God. Paul's saying this is a serious issue within the church in Rome. And what do we do about this? Well, Paul said this in Romans chapter 3, which we'll get later, verse 10. It says, there is no one righteous, not even one. We need to admit and confess, like most of us did, that we're not righteous, that we can't do this on our own. Someone years ago said to me a phrase that I pushed back on right away. But they said this, they said, I daily need to be re-evangelized. Well, no, I was evangelized one time, and then I received Jesus, and then everything's been like just forward. I've been growing, right? But their point is this, is that every day I need to be reminded that I I was a sinner, that I'm saved by grace. It's by the grace of God that I'm saved. It's by his sustaining grace that I walk forward. When I have that thought, that attitude, that action, that word, that it's him I go to for forgiveness, it's not my righteousness that keeps me in right relationship with God. It is his imputed, there's a word, put on me, righteousness of God. I depend on him. I need to be reminded of who I was and who I am and who I'm becoming every single day. I need to hear the good news every day. The Welsh minister, Martin Lloyd-Jones, he said this. He said, as you read your Bible day by day, do you apply the truth to yourself? What is your motive when you read the Bible? Is it just to have knowledge of it so that you can show others how much you know and argue with them? Or are you applying the truth to yourselves? As you read, say to yourself, this is me. What is this saying about me? Allow the scriptures to search you. Otherwise, it can be very dangerous. There is a sense in which the more you know of the Bible, the more dangerous it is to you if you do not apply it to yourself. How often do we read this and say, this is good for you, this is good for you, you should read this part, right? No. It is a mirror looking back of like, do I see myself? Am I being refined? What is this shining on dark spots in my heart and my mind and my actions? Like reading this going like, oh, I have that attitude, ouch. What do I do? Yes, people have that attitude around you, but that's not your job. Remember, we were relieved of the judgment. That's God's job. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. So how does this look back at us? How does this reflect on us? What is this mirror? So what Paul does here is he starts to pick this apart. And in verse 25 through 28, he starts to talk about circumcision. Now, most of you coming to church here today did not expect me to talk about circumcision, right? Here we are talking about circumcision. Paul is